This video covers Chapter 13, the period leading up to the Civil War. You will see a rapid growth of tension between the North and the South, centered on the expansion of slavery. The abolition movement in the North will gain steam, and you will see attempts at compromise that will ultimately fail to prevent the impending crisis. Manifest destiny, a phrase coined in 1845, is the idea that the United States is destined by God to expand its dominion and spread democracy and capitalism across the entire North American continent. The philosophy drove 19th century U.S. territorial expansion and was used to justify the forced removal of American Indians and other groups from their homes. Manifest destiny was more than just pride. It was based on the idea of racial superiority, that Anglo-Saxon Americans should expand the country because the Indians, Mexicans, and others were racially unfit to be part of American society. The rapid expansion of the United States intensified the issue of slavery as new states were added to the Union, leading to the outbreak of the Civil War. This painting is the classic picture of manifest destiny often found in many history books. It was painted by John Gast in 1872 and is called American Progress. The painting shows the linear progression of American settlement, with first the trappers and traders, followed by the miners and settlers, then the railroads. The Empress of Destiny appears as an angel bringing the book of knowledge and technology, the telegraph and the railroads behind her. She is bringing light, progress, to the untamed nature and peoples of the West. The right side of the picture is much lighter than the left side of the picture. The casualties are the native peoples, animals, and the environment, all pushed to the Pacific Ocean. Note the sun is rising in the east, following Americans as they move west. In 1824, Mexico passed the General Colonization Law. This allowed foreigners to obtain land in Texas that was at least 60 miles from either the U.S. or Mexican border. The settlement must also be at least 30 miles from the coast. This law was designed to attract American settlers, strengthen the economy of the territory, and increase tax revenue. They also saw it as a buffer against U.S. expansion. The U.S. offered to buy Texas twice. Most of the American settlers were Southerners, who brought slaves and began growing cotton. In 1836, Texas won its independence from Mexico and pushed for U.S. annexation. Northerners opposed acquiring a large slave territory, and President Andrew Jackson agreed, fearing a sectional controversy and war with Mexico. In 1844, President Tyler persuaded Texas to apply for annexation again. The treaty was rejected and would be the central issue of the 1844 presidential election. As Tyler left office, he approved annexation of Texas as fellow Whig James K. Polk took office. Following exploration by the Spanish and French in the 17th and 18th centuries, Oregon was mapped by the Lewis and Clark expedition in their search for the Northwest Passage. Starting in the 1830s, many groups of pioneers traveled to the state on the famous Oregon Trail, and the U.S. began joint settlement of the area with the United Kingdom in 1818. The Oregon Trail was roughly a 2,000-mile route from Independence, Missouri to Oregon City, Oregon, which was used by hundreds of thousands of American pioneers in the mid-1800s to emigrate west. Most of the early travelers on the trail were trappers and missionaries, followed by other settlers in the 1830s. The trail was arduous and snaked through Missouri and present-day Kansas, Nebraska, Wyoming, Idaho, and finally into Oregon. Without the Oregon Trail and the passing of the Oregon Donation Land Act in 1850, which encouraged settlement into the Oregon Territory, American pioneers would have been slower to settle the American West in the 19th century. In 1846, the border between the United States and British territory was formally established at the 49th parallel. The part of the territory that was given to Britain would ultimately become part of Canada. Even before James K. Polk could take office, Congress passed a joint resolution offering annexation to Texas. In so doing, they gave Polk the possibility of war with Mexico, which soon severed diplomatic relations. In Oregon, the president seemed to be risking war with Great Britain also. The 1844 Democratic platform claimed the entire Oregon area, from the California boundary northward to latitude of 5440, the southern boundary of Russian Alaska. Extremists proclaimed 5440 or fight, but Polk, aware of diplomatic realities, knew that no course short of war was likely to get all of Oregon. Happily, neither he nor the British wanted a war. He offered to settle by extending the Canadian boundary along the 49th parallel, from the Rockies to the Pacific. When the British Prime Minister declined, Polk reasserted the American claim to the entire area. Finally, the British settled for the 49th parallel, except for the southern tip of Vancouver Island. The treaty was signed in 1846. Acquisition of California proved far more difficult. Polk sent an envoy to offer Mexico up to $20 million, plus settlement of damaged claims owed to Americans in return for California and the New Mexico country. Since no Mexican leader could cede half his country and still stay in power, Polk's envoy was not received. To bring pressure, Polk sent General Zachary Taylor to the disputed area in the Rio Grande. To Mexican troops, this was aggression, and they attacked Taylor's forces. The Mexican-American War marked the first U.S. armed conflict mainly fought on foreign soil. It pitted a politically divided and militarily unprepared Mexico against the expansionist-minded administration of the U.S. President James K. Polk, who believed that the United States had a manifest destiny to spread across the continent to the Pacific Ocean. The conflict was caused in part by the U.S. annexation of Texas. Mexico warned that any attempt to add Texas would lead to war. In addition, Polk's rejected attempt to purchase California and New Mexico led him to send troops into the disputed zone in southern Texas, prompting violence and a congressional declaration of war. U.S. troops advanced into Mexico and won battle after battle. In February of 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed. The Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, signed on February 2, 1848, ended the Mexican-American War in favor of the United States. The treaty established the southern boundary of Texas as the Rio Grande River, recognizing the U.S. annexation of Texas, and authorized the U.S. to purchase California and all territory north of the Rio Grande for $15 million. The treaty added an additional 525,000 square miles to United States territory, including the land that makes up all or parts of present-day Arizona, California, Colorado, Nevada, New Mexico, Utah, and Wyoming. The Wilmot Proviso was designed to eliminate slavery within the land acquired as a result of the Mexican-American War. Fearing the addition of a pro-slave territory, Pennsylvania Congressman David Wilmot proposed an amendment to a $2 million bill to negotiate the terms of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Although the measure was blocked in the Southern-dominated Senate, it fueled the growing controversy over slavery, and it led to the formation of the Republican Party in 1854. The anti-slavery declaration reflected the national political situation. The Democrats were divided over slavery and expansion during the 1844 election, but after his victory, James K. Polk had pushed for the acquisition of the Oregon country and for a larger share of Texas from Mexico. The language in the Wilmot Proviso was taken from the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, and several anti-slavery congressmen had written similar measures. Although the measure was blocked in the Southern-dominated Senate, it helped widen the growing sectional rift, and inspired such politicians of the time as James Buchanan, Lewis Cass, and John C. Calhoun to formulate their own plans for dealing with slavery as the nation expanded its territory. The Free Soil Party was formed after the Liberty Party came to an end following its poor showing in the election of 1844. Several members of the Whig Party who were opposed to slavery also joined the Free Soilers. The Free Soil Party's slogan was, "Free soil, free speech, free labor, and free men." The Free Soilers opposed slavery's expansion into any new territories or states. They generally believed that the government could not end slavery where it already existed, but that it could restrict slavery in new areas. A principal reason for opposing slavery's expansion was the fear of competition with Southern slaveholders. Northerners who wanted to own land in the West feared that they could not be able to compete economically with slave labor. This led to the party's call for free labor. Some abolitionists joined the Free Soil Party, but the majority of the party's members were not abolitionists. Some Free Soilers believed that African Americans were inferior to white people. These Free Soilers had no desire to provide African Americans with equal political, economic, and social rights. As a result of poor performances in the elections of 1848 and 1852, the party ceased to exist by 1854. Its former members tended to join the newly established Republican Party. On January 24, 1848, gold was discovered at the base of the Sierra Nevada Mountains, near Coloma, California. Throughout 1849, people around the United States, mostly men, borrowed money, mortgaged their property, or spent their life savings to make the difficult journey to California. In pursuit of the kind of wealth they had never dreamed of, they left their families and hometowns. In turn, women left behind took on new responsibilities such as running farms or businesses and caring for children alone. Thousands of would-be gold miners, known as 49ers, traveled overland across the mountains or by sea, sailing to Panama or even around Cape Horn, the southernmost point of South America. By the end of the year, the non-native population of California went from 20,000 to over 100,000. Gold mining towns sprung up all over the region, complete with shops, saloons, brothels, and other businesses seeking to make their own gold rush fortune. The gold rush undoubtedly sped up California's admission to the Union as the 31st state. In late 1849, California applied to enter the Union with a constitution that barred the Southern system of racial slavery, provoking a crisis in Congress between proponents of slavery and anti-slavery politicians. The Compromise of 1850 was made up of 5 bills that attempted to resolve disputes over slavery in new territories added to the United States in the wake of the Mexican-American War. It admitted California as a free state, left Utah and New Mexico to decide for themselves whether to be a slave state or a free state, defined a new Texas-New Mexico boundary, and made it easier for slave owners to recover runaways under the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. The Compromise of 1850 was the mastermind of Whig Senator Henry Clay and Democratic Senator Stephen Douglas. Lingering resentment over its provisions contributed to the outbreak of the Civil War. Here are the main points of the Compromise of 1850. It permitted slavery in Washington, D.C., but it outlawed the slave trade. California was added to the Union as a free state. Utah and New Mexico were established as territories that could decide via popular sovereignty if they would permit slavery. It defined new boundaries for the state of Texas, and removed its claims to parts of New Mexico, but awarded the state $10 million in compensation. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 required citizens to assist in apprehending runaway slaves and denied enslaved people a right to trial by jury. The passage of a strict fugitive slave law persuaded many Southerners to accept the loss of California to the abolitionists and free soilers. Yet the enforcement of the new law in the North was bitterly and sometimes forcibly resisted by anti-slavery Northerners. Enforcement of the new law drove a wedge between the North and the South. The law's chief purpose was to track down runaway slaves who had escaped to a northern state, capture them, and return them to their southern owners. The law placed fugitive slave cases under the exclusive jurisdiction of the federal government and authorized special U.S. commissioners to issue warrants to arrest fugitives. Captured persons who claimed to be a free African American and not a runaway slave were denied the right of trial by jury. Citizens who attempted to hide a runaway or obstruct enforcement of the law were subject to heavy penalties.